Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Roadmap, a clear direction advisors podcast. I'm your host, Kendra, business strategist for service-based business owners who are ready to stop running their business on instinct and start building their business with intention. Every episode, we get into the practical side of growing and scaling a service business, the strategy, financial clarity, offers, teams, and systems that it takes to build something truly sustainable. Now let's get into it. I want to ask you something today. If you've ever thought about hiring someone in your business, what stopped you? Was it the cost? Was it not knowing who to hire or what to get them to do? Was it the fear of making the wrong choice? Or did you just have absolutely no clue where to start? Those are all legitimate reasons to pause. But what I have seen far too often when people hesitate too long, they wait until they're so overwhelmed that the hire becomes desperate instead of strategic. And a desperate hire almost never, ever works out the way you need it to. What I see happen most often is that a business owner waits and waits and waits because they just don't feel ready. Tell themselves it costs too much. There's no time to train anyone. It's easier just to do it myself, right? I'm going to just keep leaning on myself and my existing team. And a lot of times, there's also a thought that they have no real clue what they want this person to do. So they wait and they wait and they wait some more. But then the day comes where they just can't wait anymore. And that's the point where the hire goes wrong, right? It's because you're hiring from panic and overwhelm. You don't have a defined role. There's no processes written down. You hire somebody, put them in a seat and say, here's the list of things that you need to do. And then you're wondering why it feels chaotic and there's frustration, right? Frustration from you, frustration from your team, and frustration from the hire. Now, it's not necessarily because the person that you've hired is wrong, but it's because the business wasn't ready for them. The cost isn't always just financial, though it can be, but sometimes the cost is a month or two of paying somebody while they're just floundering around because there's no foundation for them to work from, right? Sometimes it's the cost of managing the fallout from a bad hire that you can't spend running the business. Sometimes it's the fact that you're paying somebody and you end up doing the work yourself. It doesn't mean the hire failed. It means the preparation for the hire did. So before you hire anyone, I don't care if it's a part-time VA, a contractor, full-time employee, I don't care. You need to be able to answer 3 questions. What specific outcome will this person be responsible for? How will I know they are delivering that specific outcome? And have I confirmed that the revenue exists? Not the projected revenue, but the actual revenue to sustain this cost comfortably over time. If you can't answer all 3 of those questions clearly, you are not ready to hire yet. That's not a failure. It's information. But I do need to clarify one point. If a hire is going to allow you to do higher value work or revenue generating activities, like doing sales calls, going to networking events, creating deeper client connections with your existing clients, then that hire is actually freeing you up to make the revenue to cover the costs. But until that revenue is a reality, you still have to be able to pay this person until you actually have the revenue. So you do need to make sure you have the cash flow. Now, when we're talking about hiring, you need to hire with intention, right? You need to hire for where you're going, not just where you're at right now. You need to think about what your business needs for the next level of growth, not just to get away from the current level of overwhelm. You need to define the role that you're looking for before you even start looking for the person, right? Yes, you need to define a job description, which, right, that specific set of responsibilities, outcomes, boundaries, that needs to be defined. But you're also not necessarily looking, right, anything else. That's the defining of the role first. What will this role be doing? You also need to understand the true costs before you commit. I've talked with people and we've looked at, right, their hiring roadmap and going, okay, and they go, oh, well, it's going to cost me X, here's the salary. This is the, cost per hour for them doing it. This is the cost to bring in the contractor. That's the starting point, right? You need to factor in onboarding time. You need to factor in, is there any tools or software equipment that this person is going to need? And then you also have to make sure that you understand the capacity cost of getting it wrong and having to go out and find somebody else. I'm not saying every hire is going to be successful. Unfortunately, nobody can guarantee that. But definitely you have to understand, if you don't have the foundations in place, what is the cost of it going wrong? The other thing that you need to think about is you need to hire for a values alignment and not just a skill set. This is so important in every business, but particularly in small businesses. If you bring in one person with the wrong attitude and the wrong values, it's going to affect the culture of the business. It's going to affect the team. It's going to affect you as the business owner, and it's going to affect the client experience. Skills themselves can be taught, but values, very rarely will they shift. The other thing that you need to do is have a 90-day plan before you even bring this person on. And that 90-day plan needs to cover, what will this person learn? What is this person going to do? And what will this person deliver in their first 90 days? If you don't know that and don't understand it, the person you bring in won't either. When we're talking about defining the role, absolutely right, the job description is a core component of this. But that job description is essentially a list of tasks, and it's the start, not the finish of what you want to do when you're defining a role. So what you need to think about when you are defining the role is how that role is going to fit into the whole business. So what are they taking off your plate as the business owner, or right, somebody else on your team's plate? So what is this role going to free somebody or everybody else up to do? Is this a brand new role that you're bringing in? Or is it something that has been done inconsistently and now somebody needs to be brought in who's going to own it? They're different situations and they require different preparation. The next piece of defining the role is looking at your processes. So before you even post a job, go ask your network. You need to ask yourself, what standard operating procedures are there right now in the business? Are they written down? Maybe in a video? Or do they live entirely in somebody's head? It doesn't matter if that's your head or a team member's head. It matters because if your processes aren't documented, you're essentially handing somebody a set of responsibilities and saying, figure out how to do them. Now, of course, if you're bringing in somebody with experience, you're going to expect that they have some of that foundational, right, pieces in place. However, you still want to make sure that you're giving them the foundations of how it is done in your business. If you're not, it's going to become incredibly frustrating, not just for you and your team, but for the person that you hire. And this is the most preventable source of a hire not working out. You don't necessarily need every process documented before you hire, but you need enough that that person has a foundation to start with. And it needs to happen before you start the search, not after. One caveat to this, though, is if you are hiring somebody and bringing them in with the intention of they are actually going to be documenting your processes, then that's part of the role. So you aren't going to be documenting, right? They are coming in to do the documentation. So again, that's where it comes into defining the role. Then the last piece of defining the role is the fit. It's kind of the most elusive piece of it because it's not just the skills, it's the fit within the business. As I said before, in a small business or even a medium-sized business, one person with the wrong attitude, the wrong values is going to affect the entire business. It's going to affect you, your team, your clients, and it's the smaller the business, the more impact this has. So your business runs a certain way, and you need to hire somebody whose working style and values and attitude is compatible with that. You can teach somebody skills, but you cannot easily shift someone's values or the way that they show up to work. You need to hire for both fit and skills. Now, we've talked a lot about waiting too long to hire, but hiring too early can be just as much of a problem, and it's going to show up in one of two ways. So the first is that you bring somebody in and you don't have work to fill up their time, right? You have no processes to support them, or there's no real plan of what you're going to do with the time that they free up. So especially with a first hire, right? The idea is usually that this person's going to free you up to do more revenue generating activity, whether that's more client calls, more sales calls, more networking, more visibility, more, right, connections with clients. But if you don't actually have a plan to use that time, right, you might find yourself paying someone and then not using that freed capacity that you have to turn it into revenue. So if cash flow was already tight, that is a major problem. The second way that you can hire too early, right, is you're hiring into a team that's already at capacity. So if every single person is at capacity, maxed out, there's no bandwidth to train or onboard somebody properly, the hire is going to struggle. So you need enough slack in the system, enough open capacity to actually integrate somebody in. So if there is no time to onboard somebody properly, if there is no time to help integrate them into the company, it's going to be a very rocky start, right? So it actually is going to look like the hire isn't working out, but in actual fact, it may just be bad timing. So the sweet spot is somewhere in between, right? You're not drowning yet. You're not overwhelmed yet, but you can see it coming. There's enough work to justify the role. You have the processes in place, or at least enough of them to give them a good foundation. You have a real plan for what you're going to do with the capacity you're about to create. That's when the hire works well. So I want to share a story about somebody that I worked with in the bookkeeping and accounting space that I helped them build their hiring roadmap. So they already had a small team, right? But they were growing and getting really close to capacity. So they came to me and said, let's work on my hiring roadmap. I know what type of person I want, and I know what I'm looking for, but I truly need that process from A to Z of how I'm going to go about hiring them, because it was a brand new role for the business. So the very first thing that we did was define that role. And then as we were defining the role, of course, there's a list of tasks. But then I asked them and said, what does this free you up to do? Right? How is this going to allow you to align your business with what you want to be doing in the business? They'd never actually thought about it, right? When they'd hired their other team members, it was for some of the lower level tasks. This was kind of in between what they were doing and what their existing team was doing. But when they sat down and thought about it, the answer was clear to them, right? There were parts of the business that they truly, genuinely enjoyed doing, and parts that they were good at, and parts that were a higher value from the client perspective. So what they were doing was they were handing off pieces of some of the lower leverage work. And what they were going to be focusing on was the client relationships, the work that brought in more revenue, and the work that generated more referrals. Not that the new role wasn't important, right? And it wasn't just filling a gap. It was doing some very important work. And if it wasn't done properly, of course, it was going to affect the client experience. And right, clients were going to leave because they were unhappy. But it wasn't just filling a gap, right? This actually reshaped how the business owner was spending their time. It allowed them to not only do those higher revenue generating activities, but it also allowed them to focus on the work that truly lit them up and that they truly loved. So we ended up defining that role properly, including all of the activities, the outcomes, the education, the experience required. Then we started looking at those processes and saying what actually exists and what's just living in your head, because that needs to be documented before this person starts. So we built out the job description, the interview questions, the reference questions, so that they knew once they had the processes in place, they were going to be able to have that, right, all the pieces that they needed to go out and find that person. But the last piece that we did was we looked at their pricing. So this is where that hiring conversation and the financial foundations connect. So you're bringing somebody in to deliver your service, but your pricing needs to reflect that cost. It needs to be profitable. So what we did was we worked through what their pricing is going to look like with this new role factored in. So every time they brought on a new client, they could see their actual margins for that client. And before they'd even hired the person, right, they quoted a new client with the updating pricing strategy, and the client accepted, right? My client came back to me and said, I now know the very first time in my business exactly what my margins are on a client. And that meant that they went from being uncertain about whether they could afford to hire this person to a clear picture of what their business looked like because the numbers were right. They then went out and hired somebody. It worked out because they had everything in place before that person ever started. Now, there's one more thing that I need to say about this. And right, it's something that really doesn't come up often enough in the hiring conversations. When you are hiring somebody and making hiring decisions, they really have to align with your personal vision, not just your business goals. Right? So I've seen this up close in my own family. So my mom ran a business, and it was a seasonal craft store. And she ended up having to make the deliberate decision to step away in favor of a career that basically offered a pension, right? It wasn't a failure on her part. She made a strategic decision about the kind of life and income and retirement that she wanted for herself and for my dad. That was the right one for her. But the reason why I bring it up here is that building a team isn't always the right answer for every business owner in every season of their business. So before you're mapping out your, hiring roadmap, trying to figure out who to hire, you need to ask yourself something, and you need to answer it honestly. What kind of business do I actually want to run? How involved do I want to be in the day-to-day operations of my business? What does my ideal version of this look like in 3 to 5 years? The answers to those questions, when you're answering them honestly, should shape every hiring decision you make, right? If you haven't asked them, you're building without a roadmap. And the reason I say that is I have worked with people who've said, I don't want a team. That is not the vision for my business. And that's fine. If you don't want a team, then you don't want a team. Maybe you're hiring contractors. Maybe it is about adding a lot more systems that are going to allow you to do more stuff on your own. Maybe it is, right, hiring that part-time VA, hiring the bookkeeper, hiring the social media manager, but they're not employees. It's something that you need to make the decision on before you even look at hiring anybody, contractor, freelancer, or employee. Now, here's one thing about hiring that nobody tells you. When you bring the right person into your business at the right time, it's one of the most powerful growth decisions that you can make in your business. But if you're bringing the wrong person in, or even the right person at the wrong time, that's going to set you back further than if you'd never hired at all. The difference between those two outcomes is almost always the preparation. It's not luck. It's not finding the right person. It's not, right, anything but preparation and having the foundations in place. What you need to remember is that when you are building a team, no matter what that team looks like, it's a strategic decision, not something you're doing in a panicked moment or in, a season of overwhelm. You must do it strategically. And when you hire with intention, you have a clear role defined, you have the financial ability to pay it, you have a 90-day plan for what that person's going to be doing for the first 90 days, and you have the systems in place, you're not just adding a person to your team, you're building the infrastructure of your business that's going to allow you to grow beyond what you can do alone and what your existing team can do. So if hiring is something that you're thinking about and you really want to work through whether the timing and the role that you're looking at makes sense for your business, that's exactly the type of strategic conversations that we have in my advisory work. So you can book a discovery call at cleardirectionadvisors.com. The link is in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe and follow the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you haven't signed up for my weekly newsletter yet, right, when you do that, you're going to receive a copy of my free 5 key strategies to scale guide. You can also get that, right? The link is in the show notes. Until next time, see you on the road.